What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of THPStrength. We have been rolling this month, trying to put out as much content as we possibly can and stay as consistent as we possibly can, and I feel like we're doing pretty well, so we're going to keep it going. Today's topic is going to be weightlifting and the benefits of weightlifting, specifically clean and jerk and snatch, and why those lifts are major staples in my programming. But before that, we just want you guys to know that this week's podcast is brought to you by Legion Supplements. It is one of the biggest questions that we get asked is how to improve recovery. One of the only ways to do this is to give yourself and your body more bioavailability so that you have the substrates that you need to optimally let your body repair itself. Personally, right now, I am religiously taking my fish oil. I also take the multivitamin to optimize my hormone profile. I had a hormone profile done, and it indicated that I needed more vitamin D to allow me to increase my not total testosterone, but free testosterone. So I have been religiously taking their supplements because they are evidence-based, and I know I'm getting enough of the supplements that I actually need. I'm also religious about taking fish oil because that can decrease SHBG, which mine was high, meaning that my testosterone is not binding to this hormone is too high, so it's actually binding and grabbing the testosterone that I want to bind to other receptor proteins in the body to allow me to adapt and be a better athlete. That's the reason why. That's the specifics of it. Highly recommend at least getting on those two supplements, the fish oil and the multivitamin. I also use their protein because it tastes good, it mixes easily, and it's nice to just buy everything in one place, have it all shipped here, and then I can use it. That all said, we'll get into it here. First time hearing about weightlifting. Hunter, what was your first experience hearing about weightlifting? Maybe even let's back up a step. What was your perception of what weightlifting is? Did you think it was powerlifting?
Yeah, so no, so I kind of have a experience or background that I'm sure many of our listeners probably have, and it was you go from eighth grade to ninth grade here in the states, and now you're a high school athlete, and with that comes weight rooms, and so I played football in high school, and so my first experience
Wait,
with
real quick, I have to interrupt.
weightlifting
Tell them who
was
was on your high school football team.
oh, I played football with Odell Beckham for 3 years.
ODBJ. I think it's
That might
hilarious. I
set
think it's
facts.
awesome. How freaky was he?
His sophomore year, he was just really fast and not very big. His junior year, he started to say, "Oh, this guy's probably going to be an issue." And by his senior year, it was kind of freaky. And then a lot of people like to throw shade at him, but I've never seen a dude work so hard in off season going from senior year to freshman year of college. I mean, we'd be doing 2 days, and that dude was just running stands nonstop. So he was actually recruited as an athlete to LSU. They didn't know what position he was going to play, and he kind of showed up, and the rest is history.
He learned how to catch footballs. Back to your story.
Yeah.
So
Um,
ODBJ and you were in the weight room
so
getting
anyway,
getting reps in.
yeah, I was just told like, hey, if you want to run faster, if you want to jump higher, if you want to be more explosive an athlete, like you got to do power cleans, hang cleans,
Did you think
push
that
jerks,
weightlifting
that
was
whole thing. And
powerlifting and
so
powerlifting was weightlifting? Because the names are pretty.
I had no idea what powerlifting was. I'd never heard of that. I didn't probably never even heard of weightlifting, honestly. I just thought weightlifting
Yeah,
was
that's what
lifting
most people think.
weights.
To be clear, weightlifting is a sport involving two lifts, the clean and jerk and the snatch, that you are scored on based on your body weight and how much weight you lift in each of the respective lifts. You total the weights and you get a medal based on how much you lift. It's pretty simple. Powerlifting is made up of bench press, deadlift, and squat. And your score is also indicated by the total that you score by adding up or summing those three lifts, and that's your total. And based on your weight class, if you lift the most in your weight class, you win a medal as well. One of them is based on your max strength. The other one is based off of, or your success is largely dictated by technique, mobility, power output, strength levels, speed to a certain extent because it's vertical velocity of the bar. So they're very different sports. People oftentimes don't understand that, but I'll dive into the nitty gritty of why weightlifting is different in this podcast. So, Hunter, you did those lifts. Did you get more explosive? Were you good at them? What did you hate them?
So, no, I was, your teenage boy just trying to compete with people I had no business trying to compete with in the weight room. I was what you call
No, you
a
were a
late
tryhard.
bloomer. And so I lifted too much weights, trying to keep up with the people that had hit puberty 3 or 4
When did you hit
years
puberty?
before
How
I
old were
did.
you?
And
Oh my
junior year of
goodness.
high school.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't really
I
like
started
really
to
hit
develop
puberty
when I
until
was
junior
13,
year.
man. Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
me. I was a late bloomer. And I mean, yeah. Besides having 3 knee surgeries in the first 2 years of high school, I got By the time I was a junior, I was one of the fastest people in my
You are
high
quick,
school. I mean,
actually. I've seen you
definitely
sprint.
not
You are
the
quick.
fast. Yeah,
You
I
should
can move a little
honestly,
bit.
you should post more of that. I remember you sending me videos of you sprinting back last year when you started working with me.
And it wasn't just for fun. Well, I don't just send John
No,
videos of me
it was
sprinting.
for
It
form
was
critiques.
for
But he was
form
good.
critique.
He's very proficient sprinter and very powerful, super powerful. You're a good sprinter. You should definitely get more videos of that. That that all said, my
I'll throw 'em up.
experience was.
Yeah, John, go ahead. Just
Let me tell
take
you
it
how
over.
I heard about it. Also, I just realized that the note
Please
that I
indulge
put
us.
up is completely gone, Hunter. So I just want to say that I hate these notes. Just kidding. Anyways, my experience with it was.
And we're
I'm
back.
speaking. My experience with it was first doing training for track and field. I used to study vertical jump religiously, and one of the guys, Jacob Hiller, and the jump manual, I believe, claimed to be more scientific and better and talked about stretch shortening cycle and all this stuff. And I was like, oh, this guy always knows what he's doing. Not really. He was very basic looking back on it. Some of the stuff he said was true. But power cleans were in there. I remember buying it. There were a bunch of typos, and it was very unprofessional. But I did it. Didn't jump higher. Did the program. Didn't jump higher. Wasn't progressed very well. There wasn't a lot of elements that needed to be in there to actually improve your vertical. But it taught me how to work hard. So I appreciate it to some extent. And then I got power plyometrics, did that, jumped way higher, and then I trained with Mike Young. Mike Young had a PhD in biomechanics, was 20 times as qualified and 20 times the coach that either of those programs were. I guess power plyometrics was really good, but that's because the guy that wrote it was the strength coach at Oregon, which is Tracktown. And I started doing weightlifting. I started doing power cleans, snatch pulls, or derivatives of weightlifting. So the main lifts are power or clean and jerk and snatch, full snatch. But you can do derivatives of them. You don't have to catch the bar in a full squat to get the benefit of the lifts. You don't have to catch the bar overhead in snatch, and you don't have to do a jerk to get the benefit of the lifts. You can do derivatives of those or portions of the lift to receive the benefits of the lift itself. So I started doing the lifts, started getting way more powerful. I think my power clean went from 135 the first week when I tested to 215 in, I want to say, 2 to 3 months. I remember starting out and having to wrap a towel around the bar because every time it landed on my shoulders, it was really uncomfortable. I wasn't used to the bar hitting my neck. So that's how I started. I used to take a rubber band, slide it over the bar. The bar sucked. It was like a bar from Dick's Sporting Goods that was, the whole set was like 200, 300 bucks. But I used the hell out of that set. It had a bench press and a squat rack in the back, and I used to lift right in front of my refrigerator. Had like 2 inches. Was not a safe setup, but I did it in my basement. The floor was not level. Many of the problems that I formed were because I was doing unsupervised weightlifting by myself, squatting, power clean, whatever else, not to depth. Wasn't working on the mobilities that I needed, and just was like grinding. Just wanted to get better. So started doing them. Maxes went crazy high. My standing vertical went crazy high. I think my standing vertical in high school, my junior year, went from 30 to 36 in like 3 or 4 months. And then my running vertical went up to, it's hard to say, but my high jump increased from 6 foot consistently, or 5'10", 6 foot consistently, to 6'4", 3 or 4 times that season. And I was hurt leading into that. Looking back on it, I realized, hey, this training worked really well, and a big part of this training was getting my power clean up, because my power clean was a direct correlate with my power production. And that is why you should be doing it, but we'll get into the specifics of it here. Much of this information that I pulled is from a research article that just is a brief overview of weightlifting as a whole. It was published it's a review article. It is called Unique Aspects of Competitive Weightlifting, Performance Training and Physiology, University of Auckland, New Zealand. Really, really good article. It has 267 citations in it. All articles that I would recommend reading or I would make it a goal to read at some point, just to really get a full understanding of this. But really, really good overall. And I will sum it up for you guys because it does a good job of getting a lot of the data and statistics that I wanted to discuss in this podcast. Why are they valuable? That's really the reason that you're listening to this entire podcast is why should I be doing weightlifting? Why not just do hex bar deadlift or hex bar jump? Why not do a squat jump? Why not do plyometrics? Why should I do Olympic weightlifting? It's way harder to learn. The risk of injury is way higher. It is going to take me a lot of time to be proficient, to really see the benefits of it. So I'll give you the counter arguments. One, weightlifting as a sport is very complex. It requires you to be mobile. It requires you to be coordinated. It requires you to be fast. It requires you to be strong. The only thing it really doesn't ask you to do is be proficient in terms of endurance. But even then, you could argue it develops work capacity, which is your ability to handle strength volume or strength stimuli. That all said, alone is enough to motivate me to want to do it because I want to be a better athlete. I want my athletes to be better athletes. I want them to learn how to learn. I want them to be able to pick up a new skill immediately because they have had to do it over and over and over again. If your argument is, I'm not going to do this because it's hard to learn, well, how the frick, censoring myself, are you supposed to learn how to jump higher if you can't learn a very basic lift that you can break down sequentially, segmentally into 3 parts? How are you supposed to learn how to lengthen out your penultimate step or add some complexity to your sprint technique or jump off 1 foot if you're not even willing to learn a very fundamental basic lift that is going to benefit you for years to come? That is motor learning, your ability to learn. My dog took forever to learn how to sit, but once it learned, oh, this is how I sit, then it learned how to lay down, and then it learned how to stay. And when it learned those basic motor patterns, now running became something easier for my dog to learn. Now jumping became something easier for my dog to learn because my dog got coordinated. It learned this is how you achieve the motor task that I want to get done. If I want to jump over John's leg to get to the food bowl, I can do that now because I've acquired some general coordination. I've learned how to move my muscles so I can get done the tasks that I want to get done. Now I can pull on the leash harder because I know how to coordinate my shoulder and hip axis. Some of that happens naturally, but my dog has learned how to learn. Now when I tell her leave it, she's learned. That means drop it, open my mouth, let whatever's out of my mouth go. The same thing is true of weightlifting. If you want to get better at jumping and you want to be a better athlete, you have to learn how to learn. You have to learn how to move your body. If I decided at 27 years old that I want to learn how to throw a baseball, if I had all of the mobility requirements, what did you say?
Good luck.
Exactly.
Good luck. It's
But
hard.
if I had all the mobility
Not easy.
abilities and I didn't lack there, I guarantee that I would have an easier time learning that than I would had I not learned how to do all of the motor tasks that I learned in the past. It's easier for me now to acquire that skill than it would have been for me in the past, not having had learned how to learn, not having had learned how to speed jump, not having had learned how to get full extension on the first 2 to 3 strides of my acceleration. And it made me a better coach too. It taught me how to teach other people to do that. But that all said, that's a major, major motivator for you wanting to learn how to do them. Moving on. Olympic lifts give you massive, massive power outputs. That's probably one of the biggest benefits of doing them. And when you have a massive power output, it is caused by an internal physiological response, meaning it didn't just happen. Your body had to go through these internal biochemical processes to get your body to move in a certain way to move that barbell. If you've been listening to the podcast, you've heard me talk about neurons. You've heard me talk about how muscular contractions happen. You've heard me talk about the central nervous system and the spinal cord and reflexes and tendons and all of those things. And lifting heavy weights fast is what weightlifting is. And therefore, you're getting all of the benefits that come along with that are also specific to jumping. Meaning, if I'm trying to jump high, there has to be a huge neural drive in my brain. There has to be a huge volitional, voluntary drive in my brain and my spinal cord to the muscles. If I'm weightlifting, the same exact thing happens. The same exact thing. There is a ton of evidence that shows that there is a significant relationship between jumping, sprinting, agility, and weightlifting activity. Meaning, if you took a bunch of athletes and you looked at weightlifters, people that did clean and jerk and snatch, and you looked at powerlifters and football players and wrestlers and whatever else, and none of them had much experience jumping, and you just said, hey, do a standing vertical jump, or hey, sprint, or hey, do this, the weightlifters would do better. And one of the biggest reasons why is because of this neural drive and the kinematics that underlie weightlifting. The kinematics that underlie weightlifting are exactly the same as the kinematics that underlie any propulsive activity, which is triple extension. It is extension of the ankle, hip, and knee in a simultaneous, synchronized manner. That is what the second pull of weightlifting is. It is a synchronized push or drive against the ground, recruiting your hips, recruiting your quads, recruiting your hamstrings, recruiting your calves, all in unison to get a massive, massive force production, massive peak power outputs, massive peak force indicators, so high that they would actually maybe be better than what we would see in any other stimulus that we could possibly use. And even if there were other exercises that had higher peak power outputs, you get the benefit of variety. You get the benefit of endless derivatives of those lifts. You get the benefit of motor learning and coordination and skill acquisition. All of those things are blended into weightlifting. And being able to weightlift efficiently and being able to weightlift well, consistently, anecdotally, and both in research, has been shown to improve, or is related to, has been shown to be related to performance improvements in all of these other indicators that we want in team sport settings: cutting, sprinting, jumping. It's really important. Weightlifting is really important. It is why it is the first lift that I put in my programming. It is the first thing I put in because it's a high power activity that comes after the sprints or the jumping or the plyos that I wanted to do that are higher priority. But it's a degree of separation away. It allows me to get more of that specific volume in without frying my athlete, as well as driving up their force generating capacity, meaning the rate that they can generate force, how much force they can generate, and the time interval in which they can generate that force. A lot of it. It's very, very beneficial. Another reason why. The vertical velocities in power snatch and power clean are very high. You could see 3 meters per second in a power snatch. Hunter, do you know what the vertical velocity of elite high jumpers is?
No,
4.6, 4.5 of men. Women would be around 4.
That was my next
maybe
guess.
even 4.8. Might even go up to 4.8 or higher. Maybe even closer to 5. For elite male high jumpers. Is 3.5? No. But as far as moving a barbell is concerned, that is maybe the closest that you're going to see. And when you're looking at peak power outputs and times body weight and peak forces, that is some of the closest in terms of kinematics or the forces and the velocities that you're going to get in a weight room with a barbell to plyometrics and jumping in general, off one leg or 2 legs. If you're looking at 1 foot jumping, it is highly neural, it's highly coordinative. There's a lot of benefit there. If you're looking at 2 foot jumping, from a time point of view, a time stamp point of view, they're very, very similar. I would argue that the Olympic lifts, specifically power clean and power snatch, are some of the most beneficial lifts that you can do for 2 foot jumping because the time intervals are very similar when you're looking at the time to create peak force in each of those respective lifts and the time to generate peak force in 2 foot jumping. A 2 foot jump ranges anywhere from 350 to 200 milliseconds. Hunter, do you know how long in a mid-thigh iso pull, which is basically the second pull in a clean or a snatch, do you know roughly how long it is in milliseconds that it takes to create peak force? It's either A, 100, 200, 300, or 300 to 400. Which one is it? Mid-thigh iso pull. How long does it take to generate peak force? Good guess, 200. But no. 3 to 400. 3 to 400 milliseconds to generate peak force. Meaning in a lift, if you didn't have the bar moving or whatever else in your strongest position, it would take you 3 to 400 milliseconds to generate peak force. In a 2 foot jump, guess how long you have on the ground to generate peak force?
100 milliseconds.
Sorry, 2 foot jump. Keep going.
200 milliseconds. 300 milliseconds.
Yep, there between 3 and 400 milliseconds. Oh, that's super similar. Crazy how that correlates. Isaiah's power clean went up in his 2 foot jumping. He hit touch 12 too. Crazy. His max strength went up, and that drove up his power clean, and that made him have the potential to jump higher in 2 foot jumping. Crazy how that works. A lot of benefit to be gained from doing these weightlifting derivatives. Further, the rate of force development that you would see in a power clean or a snatch or power snatch, you would see happen in less than 250 milliseconds. Meaning it still has value for a 1-foot jump, or anything less than 300 milliseconds, which, by the way, is basically anything in sport worth doing. Upright sprinting, cutting, being able to accelerate and change direction, jumping off 1 foot, all of those abilities are in very short time intervals. Weightlifting is going to develop very short time, the ability to produce force in very short time intervals, especially in that second pull. A lot of value there. If you look at a lot of the work of Mike Stone and what he's done at ETSU, studying weightlifting his entire life, this is just reiterated time and time and time again is how valuable weightlifting and training like a weightlifter is. That's why, as a sport, I chose to go intern for 2 years in Olympic training site for Olympic weightlifting, meaning it was the best weightlifters in the country, the best people at clean and jerk and snatch, and I wanted to know, how do you train? And I spent every day in that weight room learning from their coach, Vance Newgard, and all the athletes there. If you guys are one of those athletes, I know Connor, you follow the podcast, or I'm guessing you might, Kenny, you might listen to it, Paul Womer, these guys, good friends of mine that lifted in that weight room. Some of the best times of my life were in that weight room. And as a sport, it's really cool as well. But all that said, as a sport, there was a lot to be gained for me as a coach that works with jumpers or sprinters, because I learned, how do you do these things at the highest level? Let's take a degree of...
Is there any point of diminishing
in terms
return?
of jumping? Of course, but
Yeah.
there's always diminishing returns. There's diminishing returns in plyos, there's diminishing returns in doing approach jumps, there's diminishing returns in sprinting. As you get closer to being better, everything is not as effective. So you want to try to basically say, who gives a fuck about diminishing returns? I want to blow through diminishing returns. If diminishing returns are a wall,
So much for not saying the F word earlier.
It's passionate.
Plowed right through that
I
one.
want to steamroll it. I want to blow through any barrier or plateau. I want to make them non-existent, which means you have to drive up anything that could potentially improve your performance. You should be seeking to improve to the greatest degree, because your goal is to leave no stones unturned. That all said, you want to do it in a safe and effective manner, and that's where a good coach can help you. Probably more importantly, a safe and effective manner. But weightlifting, again, very important. Driving up your weightlifting skill has also correlated with increases in type 2A volume and cross-sectional area. You might not gain more type 2 fibers, because that's, in research, we haven't seen that happen. If you were to look at the cross-sectional area of the vastus lateralis by taking a piece of that muscle out and looking at it under a microscope and counting how much type 2 and type 1 there was across that continuum, you would see that weightlifters basically have the same amount of type 2 fiber as Joe Blow walking around the street. But what you would also see is that the volume of those type 2 fibers and the cross-sectional area of those type 2 fibers is way higher. And as you get more type 2 relative to type 1 volume, the number of them matters, but the volume of those, or how big those muscle fibers are, is almost more important. If I had a big old chunk of type 2 fiber this big, and then a tiny little, or let's say the size of 2 fists type 2 fiber, and then I had 1 fist of type 2 fiber, and then the other fist was type 1 fiber, the 2 fists of type 2 fiber, no matter how many number of them are there, versus the 2 fists that one of them is type 1 and the other one's type 2, you obviously want to max out the size of your type 2 fibers, because that's going to increase your power output. That is one of the biggest benefits that you receive from doing weightlifting, is that you increase the cross-sectional area of those type 2 fibers. One counter argument is, well, if I do more weightlifting, I'm actually going to see a shift from type 2X to type 2A. So those are not as powerful, and that might decrease the contraction velocity, and then obviously decrease my ability to run fast and jump high. So why would I do it in the first place? Well, you might have more type 2X, but they might be the size of your pinky, versus the guy over here that has cannons worth of type 2A fiber that is going to be able to produce force faster and better than the little bit of type 2X that you have. Further, we also see when you do a correct taper that type 2A will actually shift back to type 2X, and the sum of the parts is greater than the whole, meaning all of that work that you did to maximize that type 2A fiber, you're going to see more of a benefit when you deload and taper correctly than you would from just not doing it altogether. So it's far better for you in terms of outcomes. We see that over and over again. Performance-wise, not even correlation, but causation, before and after groups doing weightlifting, the group that did the weightlifting sees greater performance improvements in every metric that would be interesting. Vertical jump, squat jump, counter movement jump without a pause, depth jump, sprinting, change in direction. You can just Google Scholar this stuff and you'll see these changes over and over and over again. Another benefit of weightlifting, specifically power clean and power snatch, and the type of training that they do, you can increase strength and power concurrently. You can't do that in powerlifting. If you're a powerlifter, you don't see the benefits that you see in weightlifting. You will not see the changes in type 2X fibers or type 2A. You will not see the cross-sectional area of those muscles increase to a greater degree than the type 1 fibers. And the reason being is because there's no time-dependent variable that dictates your success in powerlifting, meaning you can lift the weight as slow as you want. Actually, you're better at producing force when you lift it slow, so it's beneficial for you to lift the weight more slowly. So as a powerlifter, you're not going to get those benefits that you would get by doing a power clean or doing a power snatch, because there has to be intent. To get that vertical velocity high enough to lift that bar 72% of your body height in a snatch or in a power clean, to get the power output to lift that bar 65% of your standing height, you need a ton of force very quickly. A squat, a deadlift, and a bench press does not require that. It doesn't require you to produce the force fast. And as an athlete, that's what we care about. Weightlifting as a whole, very, 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 very beneficial for jumping, sprinting, whatever else, when planned appropriately. That said, I also progress inside of just doing those Olympic lifts. I'll start with clean pulls early in the season and end with a counter movement lightweight hang clean, because I'm able to take advantage of different force velocity metrics and contractile velocities, as well as training to train and getting this compounding effect where the power cleans that I did early in the year are going to make the hang cleans that I do later in the year more potent. And there's more polished ways of explaining this. I think, Hunter, I don't know if you have the correct terminology, but it's very beneficial not only to include them, but also to put them in the correct order. I'm looking at my notes here and seeing if there's anything that I missed. Two other things. We've observed 17 times body weight at the jerk dip. That's massive. That's more than sprinting. 17 times body weight during the jerk dip. That is huge peak force.
At the
jerk
dip
is when the bar's on your shoulders. If you have to dip down, and on that dip down, as the bar flexes down and you're getting to basically yield, or you're amortizing and you're producing a ton of isometric force, you're just holding that weight because you generated a downward negative vertical velocity. Then you check that momentum. So you have to bring that negative vertical velocity back to zero before you push up again.
You might want to have good coaching.
But those types of forces, you're not going to see in anything else. You're not going to see those types. Even in high jump, I think the highest is like 14 times body weight. It's on a single leg, whereas that's double leg. But that's a ton of force centrally that you have to be able to produce. Meaning on one leg, yeah, you might get up to 14 times body weight, but as far as neural drive is concerned from the brain and the spinal cord and everything else, you almost can't see higher neural drive. You're not going to see higher EMG activities. You're not going to see the brain more stimulated than in that activity, even in 1-foot jumping. Another thing, people will say, well, can I do these if I'm young? Am I going to get hurt? Research has actually indicated that, or has demonstrated, or evidence has demonstrated, that lifting more as a younger kid gives you the capacity to lift more as an adult. Higher frequencies, greater volumes, greater workloads. And the argument about injuries is preposterous. The incidence of injury in weightlifting sport as a sport is considerably lower than the incidence in football, soccer, softball, baseball, any team sport. Way lower. We've actually seen that the incidence of injury goes down when you do weightlifting and derivatives of weightlifting, meaning high bar Olympic style back squat, front squats, weightlifting with weightlifting standards, being coordinated enough to do a full snatch or a full clean and jerk. We see increases in bone density and mineral density in the bones. If you're a female, there's added benefit. Even if you're a female or a kid, there's a ton of benefit. It actually, people are like, oh, your growth plates. It does the opposite. It actually makes your bones denser and stronger. And further, the changes in hormone profile from doing weightlifting, You could see increases of 4.5 to 13 times your resting growth hormone when you weightlift. Do you know what growth hormone does? It's responsible for you getting bigger and stronger, taller, bigger, stronger, bone structure, everything else. Why would you not want, especially during development, assuming that you don't have too much workload and you're not overtraining, why would you not want those benefits? Just seems preposterous to me. Highest peak forces recorded in literature coming from weightlifting: 5,442 watts and 6,981 watts. Those are the highest power outputs observed, or wattages observed, out of any sport is occurring in weightlifting, the sport of weightlifting. The entire point of this podcast was to say it is worth doing. It is worth learning. It is worth having in your programming. And if you don't, you are missing out on a very potent, effective stimulus to improve jumping, sprinting, cutting, anything else. That's the end of my soapbox. Hunter, do you have any questions?
No questions. Granted, I've had the benefit of being able to just ask you questions through my training, but take-home message for the layman like me is that if you are trying to maximize your athleticism, it behooves you to take weightlifting very seriously. And when I say that, I don't mean just put up as much weight as possible. I mean really learning how to properly perform the exercises and then maximizing your strength in those exercises, because the direct carryover into your athletic performance will be very noticeable.
For sure. Thanks for listening, guys. In closing remarks here, like this week's podcast, if you can also, please share it, rate it, review it. It helps us win the algorithm for Apple, YouTube, Spotify, and helps us get to the top of that algorithm so we can get this content out to more people and helping more people. We love you guys so much. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you on tomorrow's episode.
See ya.